Yeah, my love for radio really came from the fact that you didn't used to have as much access to music as you have today.
Yeah.
And I would spend a lot of time listening to the radio that had a cassette deck attached to it. And whenever a song would come on that I wanted, I'd hit the record button and I'd capture it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had all of these mixed cassette tapes that would sort of had the radio DJ pitter patter in and out of these various songs.
Mm-hmm.
And some songs were really hard to find. Like I remember there was a Led Zeppelin song called Hey, Hey, What Can I Do?
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked that song. But, you know, in the 90s, like you had the CD store, but this song was like on some compilation disc that was going to cost me like $30. I didn't have $30.
Yeah.
So I remember calling into TAO and requesting that song like 3 times with the cassette tape just ready to grab it. And so it was that. It was the fact that I wanted to be a musician, but I wasn't talented enough to be a musician, and I wanted to be close to music.
Yeah.
And it was also Cardinal baseball, you know, listening to those announcers on the radio call games. It was all of those things that were like a part of my growing up that I think really first planted the seeds of interest in it.
When did somebody first tell you that you had a voice for radio?
Nobody ever told me that. and I never have thought that I did. I guess in some ways I've tried to cultivate it a little bit over the years. I don't ever try to change my voice when I'm on the air or anything. My mom, I have to give her a lot of credit too, because when DBX first opened in '96, they had a volunteer meeting at Long Branch, and she took me there and had me fill out a volunteer form. And you know, it was like 5 years later they called and wanted to know if I was still interested. And Brian Powell gave me a chance.
Yeah.
And that's really the first place that I actually had an opportunity to do it. And then from there, just one thing led to the other.
So how old were you when you first hit the airwaves?
I would have been on the air for the first time when I was 17, I guess. 17 or 18, somewhere in there. It would have been, I might have been 18. I don't recall exactly. It would have been 2000, so it would have been 18 or 19.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. And so when did you sneak into your first concert that you weren't? No.
Well,
but, you don't have to answer that one. But the just in general, like where that love of music comes from too. I mean, is the media and the music itself all kind of tied together, like you wouldn't have one without the other?
yeah, no doubt I wouldn't have one without the other. I mean, the two are inextricably linked, just going back in the history of media, of course. But my dad brought me up listening to a lot of classic rock. He listened to a lot of music.
Yeah.
And that was just the way that we passed the time, really, more so than watching television. And even when we were watching television, we were usually watching some sort of music on television, like Austin City Limits. We watched a ton of Austin City Limits. I mean, even, to this day, I think about that time and I can still sing, I want to go home with the armadillos, with country music from Amarillo to Abilene, because that was the theme song that they played. And my grandpa, Tim, and my grandmother, Doris, both chased music a lot. I mean, I have a Harry James autographed little table ticket, says reserved for Reminger, which was my grandmother's maiden name. And my grandpa was always playing big band stuff in his shop outside while we'd be grilling. And so I grew up with music just like as a part of what you did. None of my family were really musicians.
Yeah.
But that was, the Lawrence Welk show was always on when I was at my grandmother's house. So this stuff, just like the American Songbook, was baked into my head at a young age.
And that is a stellar point for a transition to the intro for the WTF Carbondale podcast, where we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives and tie it all back to this little old place we call home, Carbondale, Illinois, where I hope to bake into your head all of the interesting stuff about our guest for episode 101, technically our 100th named guest on the podcast here, Will Stevens. Hold on, if I can do this right. There we go. There's my transitions. Currently of Murfreesboro, but also formerly of Carbondale. So tell us your Southern Illinois story of how you've navigated from the mean streets of DuQuoin all the way to the kingdom of Murfreesboro.
Well, I always tell people I have 3 hometowns, DuQuoin, Carbondale, and Murfreesboro, because I was born in DuQuoin, moved to Carbondale in the 2nd grade, and went to Carbondale schools, 2nd grade through high school. Went to Johnny Logan for my associates, then went to SIU and graduated there in 2005 with my bachelor's in integrated marketing communication. I guess the thing that makes my Southern Illinois story a little bit different, or I think unique, is that my parents divorced in 1987, and I moved to Carbondale with my mom. But I would still go to my dad's in DuQuoin every weekend. And Carbondale in the 90s, for people that, were here will understand, and those that won't, I'll explain.
That you're missing out, man.
Well, it was the urban center of the region. And so when you were in Carbondale through the week, and then you were running around the Little Muddy Bottom squirrel hunting on the weekends, you really were exposed to everything that the region had to offer. And so I grew to love every aspect of what this area had to offer up because I was exposed to it all. Playing a basketball with the black kids from the northeast side of Carbondale in gym class and becoming friends with all of them. And then, like I said, going to DuQuoin and just be handed a shotgun and said, come back in a couple hours for lunch. Not a lot of people, I don't think, really lived both of those experiences the way that I did. And so I guess the point of that is just to say that was what has made me want to stay here. And what makes me still love this place so much is because I'm like hip deep in history everywhere I go. Like everywhere I look, I see some memory that I have that's a fond thing. I don't even remember what your question was now.
No, but I mean, here's the deal. I get that because I live in the same sort of like memory space, right? A lot of what I work through is dealing with unfavorable parts of my childhood and young adulthood that I'm trying to like build something anew in my mind. But like everywhere that I am is a memory. Like I live in the house that my grandfather built in 1964. Like, like it's a very like what's the word that I'm looking for here? Like almost carnal. Like it's just a part of you. Those memories. It's not about being a person and picking yourself up and taking yourself wherever you are and just spreading that out. As somebody who may, travel all over the world or all over the country and live their life in a lot of different places. It's like when you are from a place like here, you are constantly lived in that memory and then building something on top of that, something that is fresh but still directly connected to what has always been here.
Right. And the two things can sometimes be at war with one another. Because nostalgia can help fuel you, but you can't live there. And you always have to be pressing forward onto the next goal. But I understand exactly what you're talking about. Because this area has transitioned so much over the last 20 years. And we want to recapture some of those things that we remember because it was good. It was bright. It was bold. It was resonant. It was something that you want to try to see again. And so that's one of the reasons why also I've run for office, whether it was on the county board or run for mayor, was because when you're in these positions then your voice is amplified.
Yeah.
And you're able to be in rooms with decision makers and try to see, not my vision necessarily, but the vision that's expressed to me by the people I represent,
Yeah.
and advocate for them. And that's the funnest thing about being mayor or being any sort of elected office holder.
Have you ever lost an election?
Yes, I have. I ran for county board the first time in 2008 and got blown out. Frank Putman, lesson for people wanting to run for office: do not run against retired school principals. 70-30 blew me out. But I learned a lot, and I didn't work hard enough the first time.
Yeah.
The second time I ran, I knocked on 1,500 doors in Murfreesboro and won.
Yeah.
Then I ran again 2 years later. Rule number 2, do not run against retired school teachers. Because when I ran for re-election to the county board, got beat by another retired school teacher, Sharon Harris Johnson, who went on to win a county-wide office.
Yeah.
And then ran for mayor, and I've won 3 consecutive elections for mayor.
Nice. That's the key point to folks of the don't give up. Somebody's told me before, and I haven't tracked Terry Bryant's career well enough to know, but that she had ran like 4 times prior to, coming up with that initial victory. And it's like, that's it. You just stay the course. And,
Absolutely.
If that microphone keeps sliding down on you, and try and give that bar. I tried to crank it as much as I could. That's already. Sorry. But no, yeah, it's that try and try again. But the vision, the connection to the past, the moving to the future stuff. If memory serves me right, at some point in time we've talked, you've said that you had an opportunity to study or have a class taught by Senator Paul Simon.
Yes.
Outside of just Paul's influence, are there other folks that are kind of notable in your life that really kind of stand out as, the people that have really kind of driven home, these ideas of not just what to build, but how to build it?
Well, there are one person who I never met who's been quite an influence on me, and the other, was a very integral part of my life. There's been so many people. The one that I never met is Delight Morris. Read The University That Shouldn't Have Happened But Did. If you want to understand this region, read that book. If you want to understand this university, because Delight Morris and Paul Powell and Clyde Shouldnt and those guys that put this university together basically out of thin air with political influence, an unbelievable story.
Yeah.
Talk about seeing an opportunity and an opening and then squeezing every amount of juice you could get out of the orange, to use a metaphor. Just unbelievable. I love the story about Paul Powell, who, of course, has a disgraced name as the Secretary of State that had all the corrupt money in the St. Nicholas Hotel in Springfield. But when he was Speaker of the Illinois House, think about this. There was a time when the Speaker of the Illinois House lived in Vienna, and he's in Springfield during budget negotiations, and he tells the state senator that represents the University of Illinois, we just won't fund U of I this year until you give me what I want for Southern. And was able to build a law school here. It's an incredible book. So I always think about Delight Morris and his political savvy.
Yeah.
There's a man who I worked for at WXAN Radio, which has been my full-time job the last 16 years, named Harold Lauder, who passed away in 2019. And Harold was a devout Christian. He was the most hard-working person I have ever seen. He made his money dredging sand off the Mississippi River and selling it to concrete companies. His hands looked like they had been shredded by a blender and pieced back together with super glue a half dozen times. just a lesson in perseverance. Because I think, and this quote is not original to me, but I'll sort of paraphrase it. Someone once said, I think the most important aspect of people who win is simply perseverance. They, don't have rich parents. They don't necessarily go to fancy schools, and they don't necessarily have the highest IQ. They just course correct and keep going and never quit. And that was Harold. So many challenges in his life, came from nothing, and built 2 radio stations basically with his bare hands. Working side by side with him for 16 years really taught me what grit was all about. I think that our generation today has less grittiness, and I think it's partially, and I'm not advocating for poverty, of course, but if you come up through poverty, you more appreciate luxury. And I think that in our world today, our country is so wealthy, and there are issues with that. I mean, I'm a Republican, conservative, but we do have a wealth gap problem in this country. A separation between the wealthiest and the middle class, and I'm not sure how we're going to fix that, but it's a serious conversation that doesn't need to be dismissed. But we are so wealthy in this country that we squabble sometimes about things that I think we never would have squabbled before, because we're trying to put food on the table. So those are people that influenced me, and some of the things that are just kind of boiling in the back of my brain as I go about my day.
Well, and the course correction thing, I think, is something that sticks out of what you just said, right? And how important that is in the work that you do in policy making, right? That too many people too often dwell on the one thing that happened in this way, and that's what I'm stuck with. And don't look at the concept of a body of work, right? The concept of ongoing effort, right? That no matter what level you are in any organization, that mistakes can be made, and that your effort needs to be to simply, again, course correct on the other side of that, and make right if oops, we did wrong.
Yes, absolutely. Too often we say no as policymakers because the work stops. Once you say, no, we're not going to do that, then there's nothing else to do. But when you say, yes, we'll consider that, or yes, let's try to do this together, then there's work to do. And I get it. I mean, we're all busy, and there's a lot to do. But and I've said this 100 times since I've been mayor, my default setting for people that come to meet with me is yes. We will figure out how to do this together until we can find an objection that we cannot overcome together. And if I keep my mindset on that, it doesn't mean I forget things that I've tried and did not work. And it doesn't mean that I won't inform someone who comes to me with a similar idea that, a couple years ago we tried that, and here were the issues we faced. Do you think you can overcome those problems? But you have to give people respect that have energy for your community. Anybody that has energy for my community, I'm going to have an open door for. I'm going to have more of a closed door for the apathetic. Even somebody that's upset at me has probably a lot more to tell me than somebody who thinks I'm doing a good job. Because the fact of the matter is even if I think somebody's wrong and they're mad at me, then I need to try to figure out why they think I'm wrong. Is there some way that I need to better communicate things so that this person sees what my overarching goals are? I mean, obviously you're never going to make everybody happy, as the old cliche goes, but most people don't want much more than to be heard. And those people who are willing to follow through with just a couple things usually can do amazing things for your community, because everything good, well, I should say everything. Interstate highway system, man on the moon, etc. I mean, not everything burbles from the bottom up. I mean, government does some things better, but culture in a community grows and becomes the most vibrant when it bubbles from the bottom up.
Yeah.
And when it's not tried to be whipped up from the top down. And that means, giving people some room to pursue their aspirations.
And that is, as we've talked a little bit, as I brought up kind of the different media activities and little things, and you've been like, hey, here's what I can do from a strong mayor position, right? Something as simple as, I can just sign something over and we can shut a road down for a day so that we can go out and make an event happen. Things like these that are just the basic lifts of, accommodation to the individual for the betterment of the whole.
Right.
So no, I dig that and I appreciate that. And that's what as I was telling you before we hopped on here, I love how my experiences working in Murfreesboro over the past couple months and then all of the months to come, what that experience has been like. But at the same time, I turn around and go, why don't I have even half that ease functioning in, my own space here, just one town over? And it may be part and parcel to, we've got a larger system and that more metro area feel of, it's just a little bit tougher for barriers to entry when you've got a population that's just 4 or 5x to the communities around you, and how that activity can just play out. But ultimately, I think the mutual relationship just being in Jackson County,
sure,
really, what's good for one is good for all type deal.
Absolutely. And I want to say that I love Carbondale. I've grown up here. As we talked about earlier, remember a lot of things about the community and experiences that I had, whether it be seeing the Smashing Pumpkins at the SIU Arena or various SIU basketball games, or, playing pool at Power Players on the Strip when I was, 16 years old. And there's just so much here, and there's such a rich history here. And I understand that when you get into a larger community, and especially a university town, there's just a different culture. Yeah. There's a larger process culture that is here. And that's anywhere you're going to go. But Carbondale offers things that Murfreesboro, can't offer. Yeah. And so each community has its strengths and weaknesses. And I tell people often about my approach to Murfreesboro. I said, a lot of things I'm doing in Murfreesboro are just things that I'm just borrowing from Carbondale. Yeah. I mean, doing Sunset Concert on Thursdays in August when the ones in Carbondale close. Yeah. This isn't rocket science. There's a lot of places do Sunset Concerts. But and borrowing things like putting my newsletter for the city on the back of the water bill. I borrowed that from Mayor Chesley up at Mount Vernon. I'm just constantly cherry picking ideas from every other town around that looks like it's working.
Now that intersection of media and representation is another one that is of great interest to me there. Where do you find the greatest value in your educational and professional background and your political functions and your governmental functions? I think that communique on the back of the water bill is is kind of a good example of that.
Well, I guess the question is, where do I kind of see like the biggest payoff from being in those two positions? Or I'm not sure if I know.
Run with it how you want to. I mean, I think that's reasonable. Like where having an understanding of media and communication plays very well into the function of governance.
Oh, well, I think one of the things that has been very helpful to me is that I have a rule that a reporter's phone call never goes to voicemail. Yeah. And look, reporters have a job to do. I've got a journalism degree from SIU Carbondale. Yeah. And they've got a deadline. And if there's something that they want to know that I can't ask, I mean, I'm just going to, or that I can't answer immediately.
Yeah.
I will do everything I can to try to get them an answer as soon as I can. And because I have done that for 10 years, I think that it helps my community get coverage of the positive things we have going on in the community.
Yeah.
I don't know that obviously nobody ever calls me up and says, we're not going to cover this, that, or the other that's negative in Murfreesboro. I've never received that phone call. But
what a dream, right?
because certainly we have crime in Murfreesboro,
Yeah.
and we have addiction issues and all those things that are talked about more broadly across Southern Illinois. But I think having a journalism degree made me perhaps respect journalists more than your average elected official. Because believe me, you get in a room full of elected officials with nobody else around, and eventually we're going to have roast journalists for dinner because, they, generally speaking, the media is not a popular group.
Yeah.
And so I find myself, even sometimes with my own staff, not often, but sometimes saying, hey, I got a call today that we got a FOIA request 3 days ago we haven't responded to yet. Why is that being backburnered?
Yeah.
So I think that it helps me in that way, because before FOIA, I mean, I guess you could hide a lot of stuff if you just didn't want to say it. But with FOIA, there's really very few things that shouldn't be public information.
Well, and people don't realize that FOIA has not been around, the entirety of the
maybe 25 years, maybe 20.
Even when it would have first been, initiated, that the ability to communicate information about a FOIA was way different because we didn't have everything digitized like we do now.
Right.
Now you couldn't just Control F and type in a word, and now you can find things
What you're looking for. Yeah.
and it just pops up. But no, and that's a novel concept. I'm sure it doesn't just come from being married to the area's top investigative reporter. No big deal, right?
Yeah. Well, I joke sometimes that rule of never letting a reporter's phone call go to voicemail ended me up married to one and with, twins and a mortgage. So, but of course I'm the happiest person in the world and very blessed and thankful for everything I have. But
how are you liking the parental life? How big of a change has it been? And I'll say it from this perspective. Everything that I have, that I do, like I had my son when I was 20, and my wife had our stepkids when she was 19. So we're like in our early 30s, raising kids that are when we're 38, it's gonna be like, oh, we have adults now.
Yeah.
So it's a very flip-flopped from where you're at with the twins that are they now a year old?
Yeah, a year and a month.
Wow. How has that flipped world upside down for you?
It doesn't matter what happens to me the rest of my life, barring an invasion by a foreign country or something. There won't be anything more difficult than going at 40 years old from no kids to twins.
Yeah.
Now, it's been immensely rewarding, especially the last 3 months or so. But, it's like trying to sail a ship while you're building it when you go from no kids to 2 kids.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's that way also for, parents that have a single child. But I was not prepared. Period. And only by the patience of my wife, by the fact that my former boss left me not a substantial amount of money, but what amounted to about a year's salary when he passed away, to help buoy our finances, and a wonderful family. it gave me a whole new appreciation for when people talk about in politics, single moms, single dads, and the challenges they face. I could not imagine if I did not have what I have, being able to successfully parent.
Yeah.
It completely reorders your view of the world around you.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say on the other side, I don't know if you guys have needed or used any type of government assistance. We have, surely. I mean, anything from, being able to utilize Illinois' healthcare coverage for kids to, things like the EBT cards that went out for every kid when schools were shut down. And it's like, these are the things that it feels like government is supposed to deliver on when like people need that hand up to get to the next stage of stability.
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, I can see where that could definitely be an eye opener on just like how difficult it is as a pair.
Well, and in my life, I have spent the majority of my time earning my living, interacting with people that I know, but I don't necessarily know real well. I mean, when you're the mayor, you're constantly reacting to various neighborhood constituent needs. When you're in the radio business like I am, you're dealing with, dozens and dozens of business owners and various, members of nonprofits and churches in my capacity. And so you have all these far-flung sort of responsibilities, but you have to become comfortable with the idea that I'm going to have to reallocate. I'm going to have to delegate some of these things to other people. I had no idea how much I was taking on directly, and I've only within the last 2 or 3 months gotten comfortable, setting some of these responsibilities off to department heads and other things. So yeah, it's been a huge learning experience. But, you talk about my love for Southern Illinois, and I don't know why it brings me so much joy that my kids' names are Martin and Nolan. And Martin is named after a late blues singer from Southern Illinois. He was like a grandfather to me. Big Larry Williams was his stage name. His name was Martin Albritton. And so Martin's named after Martin Albritton. Nolan is named after Lawrence Big Twist Nolan, who was the head of Big Twist and the Mellow Fellows, who resided in Murfreesboro, was the top band in Carbondale for a couple decades, went on and recorded 3 albums for Alligator, and I'm dear friends with his children who still reside in Murfreesboro today. So, and I considered naming my kids too at one point, Delight, after Delight Morris. I considered naming them, one of them Reese, after Mike Reese, the sports broadcaster for the Salukis. But, after a period of time and you winnow those things down, or we having boys or girls or whatever. And so I just, I really care about this place.
Yeah. God. And I mean, there's no more that you need to do other than that, right? Yes, there's the work that you need to do, but like the core of it is to just care.
Yeah.
Like, just care. It upsets me when people get into this whole thing and it's very clear that they don't care. It's like, why are you even here to begin with if you don't care?
Right.
So you're talking about, I'm going to mess this up. It's Big Larry it's Big Twist and the Mellow Fellows and
Big Larry Williams.
Big Larry Williams.
His real name was Martin Albritton.
So how did you first get into just kind of being around the music scene and not being a musician, right? Just being there, being present. Like, what was your activity in the music scene like?
Well, I just started doing the blues radio program. And once you have a radio show specific to a genre, then the local artists will inevitably start being introduced to you, or they'll bring you a CD of their music to play on the show or whatever. And so you just start connecting with people.
Yeah.
And then Ivis John, who's my same age as I am, came to Carbondale in 2000, which was the same year approximately that I started my blues show. And so he and I became very close friends, still are to this day. And then I started doing the booking for him. I did the booking for him for about 4 years or so. And I also did the booking for Big Larry for a period of time. And so you just start picking up these various relationships. And then I'm just the type of person that I'm going to try to, if I love something, I'm going to try to care for it. I'm going to try to grow it.
Yeah.
And I really loved the music and the scene and the artists. So it just happened. And then I started booking shows. You know, I'd bring bands down from Chicago, partially to get gigs where I could get more exposure for Ivis and Larry.
Yeah.
Because I wanted them to get more gigs. And so I was doing all these things to help grow their career. And then it also helped grow my blues show because now I can start going to Chicago and I can start going to these guys who are big names in Chicago. And when they're playing at a club, I can go knock on the door. I can get in for free. You know, and you find yourself in funny situations. Like little Ed Williams was playing at a club in Chicago. He gets me in for free that night. And then I go to this little backstage area, and Buddy Guy's there backstage, and his brother Phil's Phil Guy's there. And so I actually became very good friends with Buddy Guy's brother Phil. And so it's just, you say, you know, how did it happen? It was just sort of accidental.
Yeah.
I wish I had a better answer.
No, I don't think there needs to be a better answer. I think that like it just happened. I'm dying right now. I'm so sorry that I got you the
Oh, that's all good.
the saggy post
That's
here.
fine. That's fine.
Oh shucks, Nathan, get your brain back in the game here. I think it's a very real answer, right? It wasn't as if you just went out looking for it. You went out living for it, and then it just kind of happens as you go along.
Yeah, well, I just love meeting people, and I love having conversations with interesting people.
Yeah.
And believe me, there's nothing more interesting than a group of musicians. I mean, what a way to make a living, right? And when you start to get to know these folks, many of them have great tragedy that occurred in their lives. Definitely their road hasn't been straight or narrow. Yeah. And it's just a fun group of people to get to know. And then the other thing about blues music was, you know, if you're a fan of pop music, and I like some pop music, or any genre of music, rap, whatever, the stars of that music are fairly inaccessible. Yeah. Right? When it comes to blues, bluegrass, like the American roots forms of music, you can get to know these people. You can meet them. You can be, you know, sort of a part of that scene in a much bigger way than you could ever be of, you know, any number of national touring acts.
Well, I mean, I just think of just however many artists we've got in little old Southern Illinois that, you know, have been on things like the Wood Songs Radio Hour, or you know, have gotten to that, you know, national exposure level, but are still just, you know, regular old neighbors.
Right. And you get to have some of the most magical moments that way, whether it be Ivis doing the Blue Christmas shows at Shryock with Larry there. I'll never forget. Probably the most memorable scene of my life was at musically was at Global Gourmet. They used to have a little beer garden area back behind there. And there was an apartment up above, and there was some wooden flight of steps that went up to it. And it was in the late summer, or late August, early September. And I remember sitting up on top of those wooden steps, and that little garden was just busy with people. And Ripley Pryor was there, Big Larry was there, Ivis was there, Jim Skinner was there, Sharon Clark was there. And there's this group of about 40 of us who are watching what would amount to a talent level that could step on any stage in the world in the blues music genre, and they're all just there. And I just remember how special that was. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love music, and I liked getting into blues particularly, because I could have that connection.
Yeah.
That was different than being in row 300 of the Keel Center seeing Dave Matthews.
Yeah. I mean, that's accessibility in any form of art, right? Is part of what makes art valuable to existence. It's like, okay, if all art was only on a pedestal and inaccessible and there to just look at from afar, right? It would not be the same.
You lose something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. I'm thinking through all of my own experiences now. This has been a nice kind of just reflective conversation for me to really think on, what have my exposures and experiences actually like cumulative meant over time, and what that plays into moving forward. And so I really appreciate this bit. Now I've got to find a segue to wherever I'm going next, because I had like an idea in my head and that was so good. I was just like, dang.
Do you want to ask me if Nirvana played in Carbondale?
That's where I was. Thank you, because that's literally what was in my head, right? Because here's so Adam Fletcher's on the podcast. It was like just after Adam Fletcher was on the podcast, you were like, hey, and I don't even remember what the question was, but it may have been about just connecting with Adam. And so you've been working on this exploratory project of whether or not Nirvana did or did not play.
Right.
And I think I've got Adam Fletcher on the podcast saying no. I think I've got Robbie Stokes on the podcast saying yes. If Robbie didn't say it on the podcast, like live, in the very least we talked about it afterwards, where he like reached out to one of his old tech guys, and like that tech guy swore that did happen. But like it, so what's your exploration of this whole endeavor been like?
Well, it is truly, how every mystery show about UFOs ends with the announcer saying, some mysteries may never be solved. After they've insinuated all sorts of things throughout this 30 minutes of whether or not the pyramids were built by the aliens or whatever.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is that there is plenty of circumstantial evidence and people that say things happened, and there's nothing to prove that it did not. But there is no concrete evidence that it did.
Mm-hmm.
So as I say in the podcast that I've created, Finding Nirvana in Carbondale, if you are willing to believe eyewitness reports, which we all know that you can study eyewitness reports and there's lots of issues, okay? Then it happened. If you have to have like a piece of evidence, like it's written down on a schedule somewhere, you ain't gonna find it, because I spent 6 months. I mean, now to me, the most compelling piece of evidence that it did happen is there's a guy named Danny Bland who booked Nirvana's Bleach tour. And I asked him if he remembered booking a show into Carbondale. And he said, no, I do not, but I have a drug-addled mind. But he followed it up by saying, I booked a bunch of bands into Carbondale, and I booked a bunch of them into 611 Pizza. So it was definitely a place that I was aware of, and that it would have been very easy for me to route them to.
Yeah.
But
isn't the other side of that like the routing between their gig after and their gig here was like 400 miles or some crazy distance?
I will take only the slightest of exception with Adam Fletcher on that point, because it would have been approximately an hour and a half out of their way, because they were in Dallas and they were going to Iowa City.
Okay.
And you can either drive straight through to Iowa City, or you can make the little angle jog over to Southern Illinois and then go up. So it wouldn't have been completely out of the way.
Yeah.
I do have, substantial evidence that Smashing Pumpkins, I know, played at 611 Pizza 3 months later.
Oh, wow.
And so that's...
How do we not talk about that?
Well, right.
Like, how is the whole thing like, oh, Nirvana played at 611 Pizza, but nobody's ever like, hey, the Smashing Pumpkins played.
No, they definitely played there. You can find places where Billy Corgan talks about it. It's where he fired Darcy, the bass player, but then sobered up and decided to rehire the next morning. I'll forward you the article. But except for it's funny, they don't even remember the place's name right. They call it 511 Pizza. So, anyway,
in an alternate universe.
Right. So anyway, that was a really fun exploration that I just picked up on for the heck of it.
So the podcast is out.
Yes.
And people can listen to it across platforms. It's out there on all podcasty.
Just do a Google search of Finding Nirvana in Carbondale, and it's about 25 minutes. It's got interviews with half dozen people. I mean, I even got a reply back from Chad Channing, the drummer.
So you did get a reply. That's great.
Yeah.
I reached out to him through like some weird, like after, I don't remember if it was before or after we talked, but there was like some obscure 2014 website for some band of his that I found and emailed.
Yeah, like After Cars or something was like the name of that group. But now I want to be clear. I reached out to a columnist in Seattle who knows Chad Channing personally because he had written an article about him recently. And I asked him to ferry a message to him, which he did, and then he replied back to me. And Chad Channing's reply, I just asked him, do you remember playing in Carbondale, Illinois in July of 1989?
Yeah.
And the answer I got back was just one word, no.
Hey, it's better than no response.
Right.
I mean, I guess it is no response technically, but
yeah.
Oh, that's great. Hey, so are you able to utilize all the gear that you've got, whether it's at is it WXAN?
That's the day job. I mean, the podcast I did all at home.
Nice.
Yeah. Just because it was just something that on the weekends when we'd have babysitters or whatever, I'd spend a half an hour tracking somebody down and interviewing them. It's something I want to do a little bit more of. I'm actually working on another episode called Burning the Captain, which is about when the largest coal excavating shovel ever made in Pinckneyville, Illinois, burned to the ground in 1986. And it's a really interesting story about just an unbelievable piece of machinery, taller than the Statue of Liberty, that was just, you could pick up, I think it was 26 Ford F-150s with the shovel of it in one pass. And there are people that say that it was burned intentionally because it had got to the end of its useful life and it was insured by the Lloyds of London. And I mean, and there's all these old coal miners still around who were there. And you can,
1986 isn't that long ago for guys that would have been 25, 30 years old working in their prime.
Exactly. And so, just trying to explore some of these little Southern Illinois stories is fun. Same thing you do here.
Yeah, I mean, this is great. I'm really glad to hear that you're kind of working into some of this, but you're no stranger to interviewing, and that's, as we were talking about before the show, just the difficulty that people don't recognize of putting together interviews, just booking people, and the amount of time that it takes to coordinate and try and get folks in.
Right.
Aside from just talking about that feeling in general, is there anything that sticks out in your mind that was like, interviews that you've worked towards really diligently to make happen, and that they did provide that payoff on the other side of like, oh, I'm really glad I put in all this effort to try and get this person to talk to me because it was a really valuable conversation on the other side?
Well, I've had some interesting interviews over the years. Recently, I've interviewed Rod Blagojevich probably 5 times.
What?
And he's just a very interesting person.
Right.
And I don't need to, go through all of that history, but one of the most gifted politicians to ever live.
Yeah.
I mean, he has the Clinton-esque type of ability to connect with people that's just very interesting to me.
You just walk in a room and it's just there.
Yeah.
Whether like you could walk in a room not liking the guy at all, and all of a sudden you're just drawn into his.
Well, and if Rod Blagojevich ran over your dog in front of your house, by the time he left, you'd be thanking him for it. I mean,
that's a wild thought.
That's how, compelling of an individual he is.
Yeah.
Just, over the phone. But of course, you always have the thought in the back of your mind, like, obviously he's lacking in some common sense. But
a little bit of ethics here and there.
Sure. The other one that was interesting was that many years ago, WXAN brought Donna Douglas to the Bald Knob Cross for a Christian event. She was the actress that played the original Ellie Mae Clampett on the Beverly Hillbillies, okay? And I remember I was interviewing her, and she had done a movie with Elvis back in the 60s called Frankie and Johnny. It was this movie about like a kind of like a Bonnie and Clyde type couple. And I asked her in the interview, I said, Miss Douglas, would you just talk to me a little bit about the movie you did with Elvis Presley? And she said, no, I won't talk about that. And this was live on the air. And I said, well, why? And she said, Elvis led me to believe a lot of things that were not true. And she left it at that. And I'll always remember that because basically I did a little research later, and apparently they were engaged or something on the set of this movie to be married and all of this kind of stuff. And then I guess Elvis, dropped her like a hot rock once the movie shoot was over or whatever. And so that was something that sticks in my mind of all things to just kind of come out randomly.
But I mean, that's a little tidbit of information that people may never have known. People still, people watching this podcast may be the catalyst to that being a point of discussion for them.
Yeah,
at some point.
And it was interesting. I drove her around Southern Illinois for a day. Took her down to Bald Knob Cross. Darryl Strawberry, we brought him to Bald Knob Cross one time, and I spent the day chauffeuring him around. Super nice person.
Have you always been are you into cars in general, or are you just specifically into your Lincoln?
Oh, I never have been a car guy, but we have these cruise nights in Murfreesboro the first Saturday of every month, and I was around that for a while, and Lincolns are just kind of like classic bluesmobiles in a sense, and one came up for sale in town, and it was actually my former high school English teacher that had it for sale.
Who you never
Johnson.
had to run against for politics? No,
right. I hope not. God, he'd blow me out. But anyway, I drove it, had to have it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 20 feet long, 6.5 feet wide. It's a 460 8-cylinder engine. It's got black velour interior that is immaculate. It has an 8-track player in the dash. It has 5 ashtrays. It has an electric de-icer on the back window and an electric radio antenna that goes up and down with a button, all electric windows. Heat blows cold, or heat blows hot, air blows cold. It's just and it drives like a Arabian dream.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just wonderful how it treats the driver. So yeah, 76 Lincoln Continental Town Car. I highly recommend it.
It matches the persona, the suit, and the hat. And I told you I was going to get to this point, and I wouldn't let the podcast go without it. Where does the Will Stevens flair come from? Is that also kind of tied into the blues world and just like you picked up the dress kind of from being engaged in the scene, or is this something you kind of discovered of your own accord? How did you get into dressing so snazzy, I think is the right word to use?
Well, I think I always loved hats from the time when I was just a little kid, and mostly baseball caps. And so I had hundreds of them. And then as I got a little bit older, I started finding out, like, my grandfather Tim, my uncle Arlie I kind of inherited some of their brimmed hats from that era, and got to know the story of them. You know, you didn't necessarily just back in those days buy a hat just because, like, there was an occasion. Like when my uncle Arlie came back from the war, he stopped in New York and saw a Brooklyn Dodgers game, and I've still got his hat with the ticket stub from the Dodgers game he went and saw in Brooklyn. And so, again, we talk about nostalgia. Well, those things had a nostalgic feeling for me. And then, you know, you start hanging out with guys like Big Larry and Ripley, and then this music scene, and I just started picking them up. And in particular, Bailey's, and nobody's paying me to say this, but like that's
but you could.
That's the yeah, if you want to, I'd be happy to. That's the brand of hat that I typically wear, and they fit well, and partially too because I've always worn glasses. I can't wear sunglasses. I've never liked transition lenses, and so if you're going to be out, like, you got to have some shade, and now that I'm, you know, bald as a cue ball,
right?
It's, you know, just one more way to keep. I don't want to be the first guy to know it's raining, and you are if you're not wearing a hat.
That's
so.
Good.
Anyway, that's kind of where it came from. Now that I got twins, I don't have nearly as much money to spend on them, but well, that's where it came from.
And that's a jump out too as well that I wanted to poke and prod on a little bit was getting involved. The concept of being involved in politics, but not being an independently wealthy person, right? And the difficulty, you know, it doesn't matter whether, you know, you're a county board person, whether you're the governor, the president, what have you, right? Everywhere in between. And I've gotten this grilling from you know, old school politicos being like, never, don't act like money doesn't matter in politics, right? And having to navigate just being a regular old person that doesn't just bring independent wealth to participating in politics, and how you've had to navigate that in times where, you know, the budget crunch may have been difficult on you know, meeting that next step in the midst of campaigning, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, it doesn't impact the function of governance, but it does impact the actual act of trying to seek the seat of governance.
Sure. Well, at the local level, it obviously doesn't take as much money. You know, in a town of 8,000, you really have about 3,700 doors in Murfreesboro, and, you know, not all of those are going to be registered voters.
Yeah.
And so when you winnow that down to about 1,800 registered voter doors, then you can get to them all with a couple new pairs of tennis shoes and some door knockers if you will allocate yourself enough time. And so I've won the mayor's race on a budget of about $3,000, and of course I haven't run an opposed election since.
So you've had 2 unopposed elections.
Yes,
Oh,
I was
that's great.
elected in 13, ran unopposed in 17, and ran unopposed in 21.
What is it like to just be, I guess, just seen as the right guy for the job, so much so that, or maybe it's just that nobody else wants it. I don't know. One of the two.
Well, I often joke with people that I've messed things up so badly that nobody thinks they could clean up after me. But in reality, I just don't really make people wait.
Yeah.
People message me on Facebook on the way over here. Somebody messaged me about a stoplight that was been hit by a car. So I, you know, called the police department and said, hey, go check that out.
Yeah.
Earlier this morning, there was a sinkhole on the corner of 24th and McCord. And so got somebody out immediately to check on that. You know, when you just generally don't make people wait and you are the decision maker, it goes a long way toward just building community confidence. And look, I'm not trying to say this can be done everywhere, okay? Because I'm very lucky in that, over the years, I've had jobs that's allowed me the flexibility to, if a message comes in, I can, respond to that.
Yeah.
I don't, I can walk and chew bubble gum, so to speak. And Murfreesboro's not such a huge community that I can't get to most of the messages fairly quickly.
Yeah.
I could not govern in Carbondale if I were the mayor here the way that I do in Murfreesboro.
Yeah.
Because the community is just larger, or Mount Vernon, or Marion. And so I don't want anybody to take away like what I'm saying and then say to themselves, well, why doesn't Mayor Henry or Mayor Absher or whoever do it this way? Because, I think there's like a certain level of population where you can do it the way that I do it and maintain a semblance of sanity.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah.
The sanity part of it.
Right.
Well, and that is why we structure government the way that we do, from local levels all the way up to the federal level, is that every layer has a purpose. Some of it less than others, right? We may look upward in that sense sometimes, right? At some point in time, the large functions of government, it's like, hey, why don't you just be here for us to shake the money tree so we can apply it appropriately,
right,
because we're the people with the eyes on the ground, right? And then how do you spread the function of government out across the right number of people to serve the population of folks that are immediately at your service, or you are at their service.
Well,
right?
one thing that comes to my mind is that sometimes you'll hear people complain that government doesn't move fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
But frankly, the higher up you go, most of the time, the slower you want your government to act.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to be making big societal changes, like and this is one of the things that really, if anything's going to piss me off about government, it's whenever government doesn't respect the process.
Yeah.
Because when you don't respect like the process that's laid out, that's been voted on by previous elected officials, it always ends up in worse law than it would have otherwise, in my opinion. And so, it's good to some extent that your local government, is more nimble, and your federal government is not so much so.
Yeah.
Because it helps to make sure that fewer, really bad ideas get through and acted upon. I mean, they put a plan on John F. Kennedy's desk to shoot down a commercial airliner full of U.S. citizens and blame it on the Cubans. I mean, so the federal government comes up with some bad ideas. I mean, sinister things at times. And so whether you're on the left or right, people should have a healthy distrust of what's going on. I'm not saying that that's typical. It's not the example I use.
Always be skeptical.
Yeah.
But willing to work with it. Hey, I'm going to be reserved about this idea that's in front of me, but also be open enough to understand that maybe there's something I'm not seeing, but also use my common sense enough to say, I know when wrong is wrong and when right is right.
Well, and look, I don't have an army. I've got a police force, right? And so I'm kind of delving off into an area of chasing a rabbit, but the bottom line is that sometimes it's not bad whenever government, the gears grind slowly.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Well, and in that sense of what has moved slowly and what has really moved quickly, episode 101 of the WTF Carbondale podcast has just blown right by, with plenty of topics that we could have covered, and we will absolutely have Will Stevens back on the podcast at some point in time, but he's got to go. He's got to go meet up with Dad, and I can't take any more of that time. But thank you all for your time, for watching this podcast. As I work through a month and a half of not having done this and remembering my own outro line on this, have a good one, folks. Whatever that one may be.